Got it. All right, we're almost there. Can you guys see everything?
We can, but we are seeing your presenter's view. So if you go to your display settings up at the top, you can flip-flop them.
All right, here we
I have
go.
the same thing happen every time.
We'll figure it out. There we go. Okay,
That
so
looks good.
perfect. Good morning. I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day and being here with me. As Courtney said, my name is Stephanie Schweda. I'm an outreach specialist with Michigan Stay Well program. I'm also a licensed social worker, and then I have my CAADC. I work at currently, my full-time job is as a school social worker for Da Vinci. I used to work for an agency, Family Services, where I helped with Project Aware, and I was the coordinator to help increase services, mental health services in the school. Throughout COVID, I kind of realized I wanted to get back in the schools, be with the kids, which is when I made that switch in July of 2021, went back and got my school social work certificate, and I'm on my second year here. So it's fun. I'm going to ask if you guys, just in the chat as we move through this a little bit, just kind of put what your name is, where you're from, what you do, just so I can get an idea of who we have with us today. But the idea is we're going to be focusing on psychological first aid, a specific model that's used commonly in the schools, but I really want us to expand that beyond just the school realm, but thinking about how we can apply this with youth in any setting that we're at. So like I said, work in a school, also have a private practice, and even have to use a little of these skills on my 4-year-old who is constantly dysregulated, which I think is just the theme of our life right now. So just really being able to expand this beyond based on who's here with us today to figure out how you can apply this within the setting that you're in. So I want to give just a brief overview about what the Stay Well program is in the event that you've never heard of it before. The Stay Well program is a crisis counseling program, and it's administered by behavioral health professionals at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And then we're in partnership with Michigan Griffin Place. So we were originally funded through FEMA as a natural disaster relief fund. Our state has recently taken on the funding to continue on this project. Right now we have funding through September of 2022, but it looks like ideally we will receive funding beyond that, which is exciting. So the Stay Well program really has two main components. The first is our crisis counseling hotline, which is staffed by counselors who've actually undergone training in psychological first aid, different behavioral health disaster relief efforts. And then we also have our counseling line, which is free, confidential, and available 24/7, and that number is there. Courtney at the end of this is going to send out a resource packet, and there's going to have all this information in it as well. So the second component to Stay Well is our behavioral health outreach, and this really has three goals. The first is we want to validate, normalize, and humanize the response to the pandemic. The second is to direct people in need of that Stay Well counseling line. And then the third is to provide resources to help individuals cope. So for example, we offer webinars just like this one. We also on our website have tons of different options for live and recorded ones. And then we also have free online support groups and free printed material as well. Under the grant, outreach specialists like myself, we serve a variety of vulnerable populations within the state that are experiencing anxiety and distress in different ways. I specifically focus on K-12 educators, so that's where a lot of my background comes from. So looking at, just a second, sorry. Looking at kind of the umbrella term of what psychological first aid, the need for a model to address post-traumatic stress disorder came about after the 9/11 attacks. Psychological first aid resources really began to surface in 2005. And this was a concept that was developed by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and the National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. So I want to take a minute to really, sorry. I had a video that I meant to take out, so I apologize. So I want to take a moment to look at this quote, right? Every kid is one caring adult away from being a success story. In all the work that I've done, especially in the trauma work, this is a huge protective or resiliency factors for our kids. Many times kids, they identify a teacher, it's someone in their life, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, as that one person for them. So it's really important that we help to build those relationships with our youth, because we know that really is, they're one adult away from being a success story. So I hope as we move through this presentation, you're able to kind of get a few more tips and tricks to be there for our youth right now, because we know that they are struggling. So the specific model, right, under psychological first aid, kind of that umbrella, there's a specific model underneath that, which is listen, protect, and connect. And that's really what we're going to focus on today. And like I said, this really is a model that was designed for schools, but I think that what we talk about today can be applied in all different areas. So a model like this really became evident after, it was really meant for, shootings, other acts of violence in a school campus. However, the goals of this model really have, prevalence to COVID-19 and just what all of our youth are experiencing right now. So, this continues to be important as we've moved, especially through this school year, but we're getting ready to go into our summer months. Our kids right now and our adults are kind of being re-triggered with so many uncertainties. I know in schools right now, particularly, there's lots of, constant worry about, mandates, quarantine still, school closure, contacting and spread of the virus. So a lot of these uncertainties can also trigger emotional, physical, physiological, and cognitive symptoms, which can lead to a decline in mental health. Specifically, I know we are just having like an uptick in behaviors right now across schools, just because we're coming back from spring break. We had state testing. They're kind of getting settled in, and then we've got some, summer fever that's happening. So, that uncertainty of not knowing what's going to look like next. Right now, Jackson County has a really high homeless population in the school. So that's, not knowing where you're going home, if you've got a meal coming, again, that's going to re-trigger all these things that don't even necessarily have anything to do with COVID, just the everyday trauma that our youth are experiencing. So there's three main goals to this model. The first is we want to remove the social and emotional barriers to learning after a crisis. We want to help keep students actively engaged in learning by reducing fears, stress, and worry. And then we want to help students find new ways of coping and adapting to a new normal. So I think it's really important that before we get into the specific steps, we talk a little bit about a relatively new term called COVID traumatic stress. And this theory was really coined from the term secondary traumatic stress. So it's still undergoing some evaluation to determine its accuracy, but it has been validated in nature. So COVID traumatic stress and secondary traumatic stress tend to occur in caregivers, first responders, mental health and medical professionals, nonprofit workers, really those who are working with populations who are suffering from the effects of direct trauma. So, looking at who we have here today, what you do and the work you're doing, we definitely know that you can be, you're also impacted by this, right? Based on the work that we're doing. So that's not an exemption. And we know that we also have, based on our quote earlier, we have a large impact on our student success and mental health. So it's important that we acknowledge that people's brains and bodies are struggling to adjust to constant change and make sense of a new daily reality. After 2 years, right, we're on our 2-year mark of changes. We're finishing off the school year with lots of uncertainties. So we're expected to change our routine schedules. I know I guess I have a 4-year-old in preschool, so I've got to change. If they've got a school closure, I've got to figure out not only what I'm going to do with her, but how to get her different places while also being an educator as well. That's really challenging, right? Everything around us is constantly changing. So there's definitely a mix of emotions, a mix of feelings about just the everyday life that we're going through, not to mention adding COVID on top of that. So we know that due to COVID traumatic stress, adults are feeling overwhelmed. They're not necessarily meeting their own needs right now, but really meeting the needs of those we're serving. There's been a significant increase in mental health referrals around the United States, as we know mental health needs have increased due to COVID-19. So in the next few slides, we're going to talk about some common reactions to trauma. And in the resource packet that Courtney's going to send out at the end, you're going to find some a little bit more detailed information on COVID traumatic stress, burnout, secondary traumatic stress. But I will be presenting on that later this afternoon, just a more thorough understanding of COVID traumatic stress and burnout. So it is important that we understand what the different needs of our students are, as far as being able to pay attention to some of their physiological reactions, cognitive reactions, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail where I'll need a little interaction from our group. But I want to take a minute to also just talk about post-traumatic stress. This can occur in people who've experienced or witnessed a traumatic event. People can have PTSD completely unrelated to COVID, but they can also be experiencing trauma-like symptoms that are related to COVID. So there's a lot of research out there right now about the connection between COVID and PTSD, but it's just really important that if you do feel like someone you're working with is experiencing PTSD symptoms, we want to make a referral for the appropriate services because we know there's specific treatment required for PTSD. So using the chat button, the chat option, I want you guys just to think about, in your experience, it can be with your own kids, it can be with the kids you're working with, what are just some common emotional reactions that we're seeing that maybe are a little more than normal, or just, with whatever work we're doing, what are those common emotional reactions we're seeing in kids right now? Someone shared anxiety. Yeah, that's a big one right now, right? Avoidance, anger, isolating. We got distraction, quick to anger. Yes. Impulsivity. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Just to add to a few more of those that you guys have added in there, right? What you said, anxiety, right? Increased worries or fears. Someone shared hypervigilance. Absolutely. Worries and fears about the reoccurrence of event, feelings of guilt or blame, worries or fears about separation or loss, worries about the ongoing situation, and feelings of helplessness. I used this example in a presentation I did earlier this week of we just hit the 2-year mark, right, of our stay-at-home order, which was back in April. And it was really interesting because I noticed in different settings that I work in, right, that there just seemed to be a lot more anxiety and a lot more fear. And I was trying to figure out, like, man, what is going on? And all of a sudden it hit me that, the Snapchat reminders and Facebook reminders and photo memory reminders were reminding people of kind of what was going on 2 years ago. All that uncertainty, all that fear, we didn't know anything at that point, really. Even 2 years to this point, we were still kind of figuring it all out. I remember delivering groceries to my grandma, and she'd leave them outside or she'd spray them down and wear gloves, right? There's just so much we didn't know. So that really makes sense how we kind of can be re-triggered, right, by those emotional reactions, that fear, that worry about, and we're being re-triggered by memories that we have from 2 years ago, even a year ago. So again, in that chat, think about some of the physiological reactions, right? What are we seeing in our youth's bodies? What are they saying is going on with their body? What are they, what are those physiological reactions they may be having? Yeah, someone shared insomnia. This is so big. Yeah, a lot of anxiety and worry about and not falling asleep. And then I also think that insomnia really playing into like their structure and routine has been so off, even when we have kids who are out because of exposure, or they're out because of testing positive for COVID, like their sleep schedule is completely different. I know I've even struggled with some insomnia, right? Like I don't have a problem falling asleep, but I'm waking up in the middle of the night. So I think that's a big one, which leaves you tired and exhausted the next day. Headaches, stomach aches, absolutely. So yeah, so there might be some increased sensitivity to sound. Their startle responses might be a little bit bigger. And then exactly those somatic complaints, headaches, stomach aches, fatigue, vague aches and pains. I cannot tell you how many kids we have come up to the office who are like, well, I don't feel good. My stomach hurts. So, it's just really hard to know the difference between, is that some anxiety going on, or is that COVID? Is it sickness, right? We also have all the wonderful germs of being in a school. And again, some cognitive reactions, right? So they're going to have maybe some repeated events about what's going on. Just they want to talk a lot about it. I like to use the example of the repetitive play about an event. So I shared, I have a 4-year-old, she's in preschool, and prior, probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 months ago, maybe a little longer, she has like little people corner, we call it, and she's got a grocery store set up. And so she's got her little person, and she's getting ready to go into the store, and we're getting ready to play. And she goes, oh, JJ can't go into the store because he doesn't have a mask on. So it's just really interesting to see how kind of that play comes out based on what's going around them. So, really kind of paying attention to some of that play and how they're acting out, or maybe expressing some of what they might be feeling or understanding. Okay. So we definitely know that trauma reminders are really important, right? So sights, thoughts, sounds, like I said, those reminders that were coming through were kind of triggering some thoughts and feelings and emotions about where we were at 2 years ago. And then loss reminders. We've lost, grief is probably one of the most universal emotions that we've experienced through COVID. So a lot of loss reminders of just, who we've lost throughout this time, if it's physically, through death, or if it's just the relationships that we've had to grieve throughout this time. So this one, I'm going to ask for a little bit of participation. And again, it's the last one, I promise, but really looking at the behavioral reactions. And this is normally the one that we get the most hits on, right? Because this is what we're seeing the most, is the behavioral stuff. What is going on with these kids that we're seeing? So if you just throw that in the chat, and we'll talk through a few of them. Someone shared aggression, yelling, crying. Absolutely. Yeah. A lack of engagement. Yep. Adding to, a few of those, right? We're going to see some changes in their attendance, their performance, concentration, attention, sleep, right? I've got kids who aren't sleeping at all, or some who are sleeping so much, changes in their appetite, mood, irritability. We're having some anger outbursts, temper tantrums, withdrawal, and then regression in behavior. So, I want to thank you guys for your participation in those last few slides. So as you can see, right, the reactions are there, they're happening. And we really are we need some skills to be able to help combat these reactions and symptoms, which is really what we're going to focus on through the rest of this presentation. So here are the 5 steps to the Listen, Protect, and Connect model. Each step is formulated to help, be able to reduce distress and then help facilitate learning in the classroom, or it can be online campus, right? So the steps are based on a model of cognitive learning and behavior that helps people put their experiences and feelings into words, provides support and encouragement, engages users in practical problem solving, right? Our kids are really struggling with some problem solving right now. We're going to want to model some calm and optimistic behavior, and then teach others about how traumatic stress affects human behavior. So again, in that resource packet, all of those physiological, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral reactions are going to be on there. And that's a great tool to be able to share and really that validate, normalize, right? Teach how human behavior impacts trauma and stress. So you'll have that all right in there as a slide or a reference point as well. So step 1, this really comes to just listening, right? We want to be able to set up some opportunities to be able to listen, to be able to share how, they may be expressing their feelings. It can be anxiety, fear. It's important that we establish rapport and trust as quickly as possible. And based on some of the people that we have here, I think we know that, right? We've got to build the rapport, and we have to create the safe place for them. So your intent in listening to the person speaking to you about his or her crisis is that you want to convey your interest and your empathy. So, we don't have, we're really just acknowledging what has happened and letting students know that it's okay to share their experiences. So you're going to see, that the nonverbal, right? That's really important. Really asking some of those questions. What's stopping you from coming to school? I think as a school social worker, that's a lot of times when I just sit down and it's not necessarily, hey, you're doing this or you're doing that. Like, why don't you want to be here? What's stopping you from coming? Oh, well, I'm not getting, I don't have a ride here, or I'm not getting enough sleep, right? What's stopping you from paying attention? So just being able to ask some of these questions, and really being able to listen, observe, and note changes in their behavior, right? We're noting changes in school performance, their interactions with other people, participation in school-based activities, and then the behaviors that are happening at home too, right? So that's really important to see if there's some differences between home and school, or, yeah. It's so for some of, I think that in our chat, we have some mental health providers on here too. So really getting a good understanding of what is happening at school versus what's happening at home. And so being able to collaborate and coordinate with all of those different people. I think it's really important that we take a moment to look at validation. Validation is a tool that lets another person know that you understand and you accept their feelings and thoughts about the situation. So remember, when we are validating, we're not saying that we agree with or we like their behavior. We're just simply stating that we're listening and we're trying to understand their point. So some different examples of, just some simple validating statements is that makes sense, you're frustrated. This is a difficult situation. It's okay that you're frustrated right now. I believe we can figure this out together. Your emotions make sense. I can understand why you feel that way. So it's really important when we are validating and we're offering this opportunity to listen and hear our youth. It's important that your body language is appropriate and you have put away distractions. You're showing them that you're listening to them. You're looking at them, maybe nodding, using some reflective listening, right? Because they want to see that we care, that we're looking, that we're paying attention. So being able to put some of those distractions away is really important. So the second step is to protect. So we want to avoid the possibility of re-traumatization. So school staff members, right, we should really try to establish feelings of both physical and emotional safety. This can be done in many different ways, including we want to provide calm routine, offering information about what's being done in the community, right? So if there's some questions about what's happening, being able to have some answers to that, being able to sit down and have those conversations versus this is just what has to be done. So a few just talking points to this, and again, this will all be available to you in a resource guide, but just a few pieces that I like to bring up, especially when our youth have questions about kind of what's being done, like why do we have to wear masks, or why can we not sit with our friends, or why for us, at one point, we allowed our students to use backpacks. And then this year we decided we were going to go back to using lockers. And one thing that I think was really important is being able to sit down with the kids and explain to them why we've changed that, right? It's a safety issue. We can't have backpacks around. We were being mindful of, COVID and not having people at their lockers and bunched up together, but we did have to go back to some of those safety pieces of putting your backpack back in your locker. And some of our students were really upset about that, right? So we really tried to sit down and explain to them as a whole and explain to them individually why we had to make some of these changes versus just coming in and saying, you have to have your backpack and that's the rule, you have to listen to it, right? But trying to explain to them what's going on, right? And some of the things that the school or the community are going to do for safety are going to spark some controversy, right? But really the go-to line are, these are the practices the school has set in place to increase your safety during this time. So, and again, replace school with whatever setting you're in, right? These, again, are ways we can hopefully use this in multiple different settings. Another piece I want to note on this list is a break. So how can you allow natural breaks to occur within the classroom, within your session, within a group? What sensory tools do you have available? I think the really cool thing too is being able to teach how to use sensory tools. I think we use them often, they're talked a lot about, but really being able to connect that to the mindfulness piece, right? We're using those sensory tools to bring us back to the here and now, to kind of distract those unhelpful thoughts. So really being able to teach, that's one thing that I do at our school is we do an orientation and we have a few sensory rooms. And that's part of what I teach is I take them in there and I show them different sensory tools and how they're going to help with the different senses, right? So really being able to teach them how to use those rooms appropriately. Thinking about what social emotional learning we're using too, if you're in a school setting or just in general, right? I know problem solving is a big thing, so I have to help. Particularly, I have a couple grades that I'm helping with just their social emotional learning, right? We're going in there and we're teaching some good basic skills because some of that was lost for our kids. So just really looking at some of that. So protection, right? What are we doing to help protect our kids? Connection, I would say this is probably one of the most important steps. This step is really to help students and their peers. We want to reestablish their normal social relationships and stay connected to others in order to experience social support. One of the most common reactions to trauma or fear is emotional and social isolation and the sense of loss of social supports. So restoring and building connections, even in an online environment, promotes stability, recovery, and predictability into people's lives. So what's really cool, and we're going to talk about it at the end as well, but we have some discussion groups. So, these are really great referrals for not only yourself, but for those that we're serving, right? They're just a great way to connect, right? Some ways. And I know I have quite a few people that I work with, more so in my private practice, but in the school setting too, who their way of connectivity is video games, right? The online world. And I think that can be kind of a double-edged sword, right? So we wanted to connect, but we also want that physical connection, the connection of people around us, right? So any school activities, sports, we have all sorts. The YMCA, I absolutely love the YMCA here. There's so many different types of activities to try to get students involved in. So just really being able to find out what are some of those things that we can get them, not necessarily just checking in the virtual world, but a little more in our real world too. So our fourth step to this is model. So we want to be able, we're all kind of still learning ways to navigate the process of recovery, but we are able to acknowledge the disruption to school, to our everyday lives, right? And be able to acknowledge that it's impacting us as well, right? This idea that we want to get back to normal, but normal is really changing. It is, and it kind of changes every single day. So through our examples, we can demonstrate that adults can effectively cope with stress despite fear or loss that we might be experiencing, right? So really being able to, obviously with some boundaries, being vulnerable about how things are impacting you, right? And then being able to show, here's what I do to cope. Here's what I do to manage this. So we want to be aware of our own thoughts and feelings and reactions, right? There are many times where, for instance, just some different educators, I go and take them on a walk, right? Like, come on, let's go take a walk. I can see that this is overwhelming, right? Or let me go sit in your classroom so you can go take a break, seeing how we can help support other people around us when we're seeing they're struggling, right? Because that's important to model that. Really monitoring conversations that students can hear around us, right? So this is always really important. Even as a parent, my daughter's an only child, and so she's like a mini teenager already, but she very much wants to be in adult conversations, and we have to really monitor the things that we're saying around. I know, for instance, if I'm feeling overwhelmed or anxious about a situation and she overhears that, she takes on a little of that anxiety, right? That little of overwhelmingness. So, really monitoring what those are, but also if I am going to have those conversations, being able to show her here's what I'm doing to try and keep myself calm and relaxed, right? Saying some of those things out loud, because we know that kids pick up on our stress. So any ways that we can try to, effectively cope with that stress is going to be really important because they're seeing that. And the last step, this is teaching, right? So that's based on, we've got school counselors, nurses, psychologists, social workers who can teach students, staff, families, volunteers about common reactions to trauma events. So again, going back to those different slides that we went through, that's a really great way to, give that psychoeducation, that teaching portion of what people might be experiencing throughout COVID or just throughout a traumatic event. So we know that some additional common reactions are, students and youth, right? Children, they're gonna have more difficult with learning during and after a crisis. The hard thing with COVID is it has an indefinite timeline, right? So unlike other crisis or traumatic events, it's kind of, it has happened, right? And we're able to start that healing process. But with COVID being indefinite, we don't know when the end of it is. We don't know, again, continuously being re-triggered, things being scaled back, being able to do stuff. So that makes it really hard to begin that healing process, to be able to start that. So, obviously we want to teach what can be some of those immediate reactions to trauma, right? But also understanding that it's going to be a process. So it's going to be a continuous process. So it's not going to be just, okay, COVID's happened, but the impacts of COVID continue to impact us as we've moved, as we're here and after 2 years. So a really great ending statement to psychological first aid, right, is just know that there are people here who care about you, who want to help, who want to support you and talk to you anytime. And I know that in different settings, this can be difficult, but that's why it's really important to help that student or that youth be able to identify who are those people in multiple different settings, right? So who's their person in school? Who's maybe their backup person? Who's their person at home? Who's their person in their sports, in their extended family, right? So being able to help them identify who some of those supports are, so that way they are able to connect to those people. So some different risk factors that I think are just important to bring in, right? If you have a student who has any of the experiences shown here, you may wish to consider referring them to the school psychologist, counselor, social worker, or even the local community mental health agency, right? So depending on what the severity of the situation is, we might want to refer them out. So, just really understanding that even if a student is involved in outside resources, these are still great tools to be able to implement into everyday life, right? So even if they're in outside services, these are still great things to be able to be a part of that. So again, the timeline for recovery, it's not fixed and it depends on so many different factors. So it is normal for children and adults to experience heightened upset and distress for a few weeks immediately after a crisis occurs. However, if the child continues to have difficulty with eating, sleeping, regulating their emotions, failing to adapt, after 6 to 8 weeks, we might need to make a referral on. So you're going to see some of these risk factors, which is going to seem like, well, yeah, this has been everybody, right? This is every single person I can think of has one of these. So I really want you to think of this model really as kind of like that triage service. So the reality of it is, you might not be able to refer them on right away because there's different barriers to that. So really kind of what of those steps can I implement? How can I create this safe and supportive environment for them to share while we wait for them to get into services, if that makes sense. So really thinking of this is triage, right? This is everything we can do for someone regardless of what they might be experiencing. So again, yes, all these risk factors, we should have them in counseling. That would be great. But the reality of it is we know there's not enough supports for everyone to be in counseling. So being able to provide some of these opportunities for students and youth to process through those emotions, again, can help potentially prevent needing to, these symptoms getting worse for them. So moving to implementation, psychological first aid, the LPC model, it's really not intended as just a single session, right? We do this one time, a student recites their experiences, but this really is just an interactive process by which teachers and staff can identify potential psychological and emotional roadblocks to learning over time. Students might need to tell their stories at different times and in different settings, right? So online, in person, even offering an opportunity like journal articling, small group, individual, right? Being able to offer a multitude of ways to be able to share what they're experiencing. and also that they may need to share again over multiple opportunities, right? Like, because there's going to be things that remind them of loss. They're going to have trauma that's completely unrelated to COVID. So what causes a student stress immediately after a crisis can be different at different points, and at different points in time over the course of weeks, months, or years, right? So it's helpful to help them understand what some of those triggers might be, but they might not know. So being able to offer that opportunity is really important. Also understanding that not just one adult has to be the person who is providing psychological first aid, right? Any way that we can push this model, push these steps onto anybody within the setting is really important. So for instance, when I work a lot with educators, it's kind of like, this is great for secretaries to know, right? Because we know our secretaries sometimes are the front line of defense, or the first person someone sees. So them having some of these skills. Our cafeteria workers are, people who help clean, teachers, parapros, everyone within a school setting. And again, thinking about what setting you're in, everyone within those different settings, right, that you're in, it could be important for them to understand some of these steps. So kind of looking through the chat if you want, or I think you can unmute yourself if you want to just share, but I want us to just kind of talk through what do you see as some, potential barriers to being able to implement psychological first aid? Again, you can unmute, or maybe you can raise your hand. I'm not sure if we have that functioning, or just being able to put it in the chat. So what do you kind of anticipate being a challenge to implement psychological first aid in your setting? Okay, so Courtney shared that attendees do have the ability to unmute. So someone shared access to services. And honestly, as a school social worker, I've said this before, that sometimes I feel like, I might have 50 kids who are in my office, and it sometimes feels like I have to choose which are the worst, right? I think that everyone needs counseling, everyone needs services, but again, that's not necessarily an option. So I think that you are spot on. Like, access to services is so hard. We've got wait lists. There's just, the reality is we don't have enough providers for the need right now. And I know specifically in our community, like, we have agencies who are working really, really hard at that, but I know that's really challenging. Prior to COVID, we were able to have a little bit more supports in the school with counseling, and because of staffing and access and things like that, it's been a little bit harder because we have a lot of students who have barriers to being able to get in to services. So what are some other kind of barriers you anticipate with psychological first aid? Usually people talk about time, right? Like, who has the time to be able to sit down and do some of this? And I know that feels overwhelming, but being able to get a system set in place is really important, right? So if you do work in a school setting, being able to kind of, how can you implement some of this into your everyday, right? So again, through journal articles, or not journal articles, journal writing, small group, right? It's kind of setting up those expectations in the beginning. And I think we had a couple of people who were mental health providers, being able to set that up, like, at that first session, right? Here's how we're going to set up some of these things. How do we take a break in the middle of a session? How do we teach some sensory things? Does anybody else have any ideas? Again, either unmuting or putting in the chat as far as barriers either they are experiencing or they anticipate experiencing being able to do this.
Stephanie, I'll share something that I'm not in the schools. This is thinking more to like my personal life with my experience with my kiddo. And it's not necessarily a barrier because I want to do all these things and I try my best to do them all the time. But definitely a barrier with that is consistency on my behalf, like having the emotional capacity just to do all this for my kiddo when, he's in the midst of a meltdown. Often, sometimes I can get there too, and I feel really overwhelmed. So, for me, I've learned having, my partner be my partner in it, knowing when we got to tap each other out, or, calling him in so I can leave. We've worked really hard to get there, but that was like the biggest thing for me to learn. I could look at all this stuff and be like, I get it. It makes sense to me. In the moment doing it, I could try it, but it's really hard. It takes a long time to do it well, to stay consistent. And then it can be really difficult to do it on your own when you're struggling too.
I think you are so spot on, Courtney, because I think that is such a huge barrier, right? Is not only like our emotional stuff that might be going on, but one thing that I have to constantly remind myself, not only in the school setting, but with my own daughter, we're struggling right now too. So is that regulation, right? I don't know if you guys are familiar with the 3 R's, right? But regulate, relate, and reason. And I have to remind myself when she is kind of in that meltdown mode, I'm going to like the reason portion, like if you don't stop this, this is what's going to happen, or this is what's going to happen. And so then like I've clearly been dysregulated, she's dysregulated, and now I'm making most likely empty threats, right? Like I'm not going to really, take all of her things away and throw them in the garbage because who even has the energy to do that? But I have to remind myself like, okay, is she even in a place to understand? She's so dysregulated at this point that like I need to give her some space, and I need some space because I'm overwhelmed, right? There's nothing worse. Sunday, I tried to go to the grocery store. We made it to the bathroom, full on meltdown. And I'm like, girl, I've got to get some food for tonight. Like, so I had to step back and go, okay, is this the end of the world, right? Like, is this worth having a meltdown? And I'm frustrated. She's frustrated. We need to just go home and we need to restart, right? I don't know. We had peanut butter and jelly for sandwich, I think, and maybe some cereal for dinner, but it was just like, I know we're not going to starve. I know we're going to be okay. And it's not worth going through this big old fight at Meyer. So I think that like I had to, it's hard to recognize that. And I did this training once and someone had said, we do our worst parenting when we're late. And that struck me, right? Like sometimes we hold these expectations of like, here's where I need to be and here's what I need to do. And it's like, man, like, is that a realistic expectation I can ask of my 4-year-old? Like, I'm already late. I'm frustrated. I'm overwhelmed. And so now I'm trying to get a 4-year-old out the door, and I'm not probably doing my best parenting. So that just always has stuck with me that like, okay, I need to recognize like my dysregulation, but also like I need to make sure she's in a good regulation. And I love the idea of tapping it with a partner, right? Like, so usually my husband knows, he's like, oh gosh, like I've heard the tone of voice change. I need to step in. And I'm like, yeah, you better, because she's a mini me. So we tend to like argue with each other a lot too, which he's just kind of like, I don't know when to step in and I don't know when to help. But I think a lot of that comes with some good communication, just where you're at of like, okay, here's like, when I get to this point, I need someone to step in and help me. And when you get to this point, this is when I, need someone to step in and help you. So I love that communication piece, but I really go back to, we are really big right now on when she's dysregulated or frustrated or upset, go into your room. She's got a Alexa in there. So she likes to have it play songs for her. And her big one right now is Let It Go. And it's the funniest thing because we still have a camera in her room. And so she'll just be like belting out to Let It Go. And she's got like these arm moves and it's this big dramatic affair. And it's so funny though, but it works for her. Like that's her thing. She knows when I go, you need to go let it go. Like she's recognizing I need to go in my room because I'm going to get myself into trouble, right? And then I'm taking that moment to take a break for myself too, because again, like me making empty threats about what I'm going to do just ends up making things worse. So I go back to, we can't reason with them until they're regulated. So really trying to help them. The other thing we use is we've got some fidgets, we've got some poppets, we've got, take a minute and do this. And I'm very honest with her too, that like, I need to take a break. Like mommy needs a break from you, so like go in your room, take a break. I'll take a break in my room and let's come back in 5 minutes. And so we'll set a timer for 5 minutes and I'll ask her, are you ready to come back? She'll say, no, I'm not ready to talk. Okay. Then we'll take some more time. So again, like just going back to how can we get them regulated? How can we keep ourselves regulated? And again, I think like being honest that like, I need a break from this. And that's got to be okay. Right. And sometimes it's really hard because they don't understand that, but that's where it's really nice when we can tap in a partner too. So I don't necessarily have all the, I don't have all the answers, but I think that it's great to just talk through some of those things too, because I think that's such a valid point, is like our own emotions and all of this, because like we're all working and we're all trying to survive through all of this too, while taking care of tiny little humans, which is exhausting. So we're having a little problem right now with hitting at school. And so, there's nothing more overwhelming than working on that with kids all day long in my profession, to then going home and having to have all these conversations again, like, nope, you can't throw things at people and you can't hit people. And so yeah, I'm right there with you. It is hard. So, and I hope to, and this afternoon, and I love that we're recording these, but if you have the opportunity to look through some of the burnout material, I think that's a really great piece too, because I think for me personally, I had to recognize that maybe I was a little burnt out from work, burnt out from being a wife, burnt out from being a mom, and trying to really set up, like, what am I doing to take care of myself, if anything, right? Because I think at one point I recognized I wasn't. So, sometimes when I work from home, like, how am I transitioning out of my day, right, to then going right into being a parent? So if you have an opportunity to look through there, I think there's some really great ideas and strategies to be able to help support if you are experiencing burnout, and not just work, burnout in life, right? Was there anybody else, someone else put in the chat here, teacher shortages throughout the county? Yeah, absolutely. Being able to consistently implement services for children while completing lessons plans, meeting academic requirements. Absolutely, there are days I'm a school social worker, but there's also days that I'm a parapro. There's days I help pass out lunch. It's hard when we're pulled in 100 different places, and the expectations are maybe higher, right? Or you're kind of pulled in all these different places, and the expectations are still there. So I definitely feel that piece too. Like, all the pieces that you mentioned here are very valid, and it makes it really hard to be able to implement these things. And I wish I had more solution to that. And I think, really looking at we can't necessarily change the teacher shortage, but how are we honoring and honoring our time, right? How are we honoring, how are we being supported by supervisors, management, things like that. So as we kind of end out our presentation here, I think a really important piece here, being able to look at this quote, right? The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. So this idea that what we do, it's very rewarding, right? But it's also emotionally draining. Like I shared, working with some kiddos at our primary level with putting their hands on people, and then going home and having to work with a 4-year-old about putting her hands on people, right? It's very emotionally draining. So, taking a minute, really kind of reading through this quote. I know I just shared it with you, but just taking a minute, right? Your pain, your discomfort, your worries, they are valid too. So it's important that we continue to grow, and we can process through our own life challenges. As often, there is a tendency to ignore your own problems because they don't feel as severe as the problems that we're serving, as those we're serving. Just remembering that you deserve support throughout this. As you've worked through this pandemic, you may have noticed that you or someone you know has experienced feelings of hopelessness or a belief that change is impossible. Maybe having some social withdrawal from coworkers, friends, families, or even society altogether. There may be even some sudden episodes of unwarranted or disproportionate anger. These are some signs of secondary traumatic stress, which can lead to compassion fatigue. It is important that we're taking care of your own mental health needs. In the resource guide, you're going to find some additional information about this topic. In there, there's a professional quality of life scale. And I would really encourage you to take a moment to fill that out and just kind of see what some of your needs may be. And what's really cool about the site is then based on how you score, it kind of will connect you to some different resources or ideas based on where you might be struggling at. So like I shared, these are some of our weekly, Stay Well weekly discussion groups. So one of probably our most popular group is our grief group. Again, most universal experience people are feeling right now is grief. We also on our website have some really great, we have like a creative coping webinar series going on right now. A coping with grief, creative coping and coping with grief. I'd have to look back through, but just some really great things to be able to go on. So they're interactive, engaging, things to do with family, or you can just join on your own. The creative coping is doing some different things with kids to be able to help them cope a little bit differently. I've actually attended a few of them and they're really great. They're really fun. So we also have our teen talk. So any teens that you have, being able to help connect them through there. And we've got some really cool teen webinars and series coming up as well. So again, going to our website, which is michigan.gov/staywell to find those resources. And then, our biggest slogan, Stay Well's biggest slogan is be kind to your mind. And we really push that, right? At the end of the day, we really just want to encourage that everyone is kind to your mind because you do deserve that. And so do the people we work with. On the screen, you're going to see my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me. In the resource packet, my contact information is also in there. If you have some specific needs for your agency, for your school that you're working in, please let me know. Courtney shared resource packet in there. Link that in. If you didn't get it, email me and I will send it to you. And then you've got your session CEU eval. But I do, we've got a couple minutes before we go, but I wanted just to open the floor for any questions, comments, just anything that you want to share. Again, you can unmute yourself or you can throw that in the chat, but I really just want to appreciate you all being here today. I want to thank Drug Free Jackson for having me here as well. And again, any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to email me or you can unmute and share now.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was fantastic. Before if anybody has any questions, I'll give another chance. But as Stephanie said, I did share the resource guide. It's a link to the Google Drive with that document, but we can send it out in our follow-up email also. And we're going to do our best to include the materials on our website with the recordings. So that information should be available afterwards. And then of course, to just complete your CEU evaluation link so that we can give you the CEUs.
Courtney, this goes until 11:50, right?
We do have this one scheduled from 11:50. Or till 11:50. We just built in 5 minutes for everybody to kind of transition in and out. And then if there was questions or overage. So we're coming up close to our hour, but we certainly don't need to stick it out just to say we
no,
did
that's
that,
fine.
so.
I was gonna say I can stay on for as long as people need. I know I ended a few minutes early, so
yeah. I think I was kind of thinking over what you offered, and we talked a lot about like access to services and then also like these types of skills, but I think that it's not an or, it's got to be an and. You can get your child into services, but you still have to master these skills to help them at home either way, right? So
yes.
I think focusing on these things, but also just because you're doing things at home and you think you're getting well, it's always okay to go and get professional help. Just to have that communication. Like, my son has times where we are really struggling, and times where we feel like we're doing fine, but even during those times, we stay with professionals and we try to build our skills then, to make the bad times not so bad.
Absolutely.
But, I've learned just communication is the best thing. So taking everything to the school that's going on at home, taking everything that the doctors and the counselors say to the school and vice versa. Because kind of what I found was, and it's not, I think his school's doing just great, but they lack the skills to help our kids sometimes too. And,
Yep.
Once we started talking more, it was kind of like, I'm no professional, but I was sharing the stuff that, I was learning. And I think that, ultimately we're better able to help my kid. But yeah, just
Yes.
communication with everybody. Good gosh, we have to talk about it.
I just love that you bring that up, Courtney, because as a school social worker, like I have a limited amount of skill, but I'm no expert, and like the parent is the expert on their child, right? Like, and that's the reality of it is like I can have all of these ideas, but like you and your family knows what's going to work best. You know what I mean? And like,
Yep.
I'm only a small percentage of that. And so I think that's such a valid piece that like, hey, this is what we're struggling with. Are you struggling with this at school? Do you have some ideas? Do you have some suggestions? Like that networking is so important. And I hope, and I think, I don't know what the research says, but I think that COVID has opened our eyes a little bit to the mental health needs, right? Like that might be one of the positives that's come, is that like we are having to reach out and ask for help from people maybe we hadn't been before, because there'd been so much like stigma with mental health, right?
Yeah.
That like, I know growing up, like if we were struggling at home, we were not sharing that with anybody, right?
No.
Like there was no way. What happened at home stayed at home. And so I do think that it has opened this opportunity and these options to be able to talk about things a little bit more freely. But then, I think that's the other really scary part that overloads our systems too, right? Is like now everyone's talking about it, now everything's out there.
Now everybody knows.
Yeah. And then this
Yeah.
need for like, we need like those tier one, right? I think of tier one strategies, not only just like in the school, but like in like, how are we teaching this as a whole, right? How are we teaching problem solving as a whole, or how are we teaching coping skills as a whole, And so, I think you're right on, like the and has to be there. Like all this stuff is great. And we got to be able to provide some good resources at home too, to help support. And, I go back to like, yeah, I did all the, what are they called? Lamage. I don't know. When you're first having a kid, you go and you do all those things. And I was like, y'all didn't prepare me for 4. Like I didn't need a class on how to change a diaper. I needed a class on how to get a 4-year-old dressed and out the door without going crazy, Like, so I was just like, that's the honest piece to it, is like, I have to be honest with the people around me, with my friends, that like, I'm struggling. I need some help. Y'all have had a couple kids. Tell me how you did it. And I don't want to just hear it's going to get better. No, I need some good skills, because like we got to survive this. So I think that like that being open and having those people, right? Having those people you can turn to voice like, this was a hard day, this was rough, like I need some help, and being able to accept that help, I think is really important too, which is, it's hard. It's so hard to accept help from people.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to accept. It's hard for me to ask. And you brought up like the stigma thing, and how I feel is, and my kid feels the same way. He has these emotions, really big emotions, and then really big behaviors. And oftentimes they come out, in their things that are typically get you in trouble, or you're bad because you did this, right? Well, he doesn't do that when he's emotionally regulated. It's when he's dysregulated. So, those behaviors come across as bad, and he internalizes it as, I'm bad, I'm a bad kid. But you also, like growing up, that was kind of the thought on kids that were struggling, that were acting out in class, were bad kids, and there was no thought given to why. Well, what's going on behind that. I think we're doing better at that now, of just understanding that, whatever it is causing this, but you still feel like that, like, and then it's the flip side of, now I've told everybody, now the school knows, all, everybody knows that me and Daniel are struggling, which is great, because I'm ready to take all the help. But it's that constant, they know we're struggling. How is Daniel? How are you doing? And you have to live through that and share those stories. And then, think of the right responses, that's like not too much, but just enough. And, all of those things that just make it really difficult to navigate, that you have to like have skills to do also, and somewhere to learn them. I don't know where.
Yes, right there. Yeah, it's so hard. It is so hard. And it's, like I said, having a little one who's hitting right now, right? And that's not
Yeah.
something she experiences in her everyday life. Like she doesn't see,
People get
as
hit,
far as I know,
right?
she doesn't
Yeah.
see people putting their hands on each other. And so I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
where is this coming from? And I
Yeah.
have to remember that, like, she's telling me she doesn't have the skills to cope right now, right? She
Yeah.
doesn't have the skills. And I love that piece too, that like I have to remind her that, like, you are a good kid.
Mhm.
You made a bad choice. You made a red choice. They use red choices and green
Yeah.
choices. You
Yeah.
made a red choice. And so she go, I had a bad day. And I go, no, you had a bad moment. Like
Yeah.
these, yeah, you hit someone, but it didn't make your whole day bad.
Mhm.
So, and I think that's so hard too, is because, like, I don't know what's always going on at school, and
Mm-mm.
we hold her very accountable to her behaviors, but I'm also kind of like, did she have a nap? Was she,
Yeah.
was she
All those.
fed? Was she, it's hard not to kind of like think of all those things, and then being like scared of, like, oh my gosh, they know I'm a social worker, and like my kid hits people. What do they think about me?
Yeah. Yep.
So it's hard not to have that own, like, that own anxiety cognitive
Yeah.
piece coming in about, like, well, yeah, now they know. So, like, what are they thinking? So, yeah, I wish someone's got to come up with something, right?
Right. Well,
Maybe that'll
I
be our
think it
next
just comes with,
series.
like you said, talking about it and sharing it. All of our kids have struggles. And, you know, looking back, I'm sure I had some of the same struggles. Like we weren't perfect
Yeah.
4-year-olds either. So how did our parents
Mhm.
navigate it?
Mhm.
But yeah, talking about it. And then
Yeah.
those parents that, like, I have actually all my parent friends are really great parents. I have some really good friends who are just fantastic parents. So trying to, see how they navigate, like when their kiddos really being resistant to something, like what are the things they say or do, or, how do they, connect with them differently?
Well, and I think too, the piece of, like, so I've got some of those friends who are real, and I've got some of those friends who are like, everything is perfect, right? And I'm kind of
Yeah.
like, I don't need that everything is perfect. I
No.
need to, like, be validated that, like, okay, it's okay that I yelled at my kid and I said I was sorry, and
Mhm.
I'm not going to scar her for the rest of her life. You know what I mean? Like, that's what
Yeah.
I need to hear, is
Yep.
that, like, like, other people sometimes lose their cool and yell at their kid, or other people
Hmm.
sometimes get frustrated, and, like, that's okay, right? And also, again, that piece of, like, okay, so now, like, validate me, but then also, like, give me some ideas, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Help me.
give me
Help me.
some ideas of what I can do a little bit differently. And for us, our morning routine is waking up 15 minutes earlier. Something
Yeah.
as simple as, like, okay, I need to, or every night now I'm putting together a couple things so we're not running out the door. And she's helping me with that. I think that's a
Mhm.
big thing, is for us to be prepared. She's helping me get this, we're making our lunches together at night, and we're getting our shoes around, and we picked our clothes out, but just something as simple as that, versus me expecting that she can do all those things in the morning. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
When she's just as stressed out as, we are trying to get
absolutely. And
out the
she's
door.
picking up on my own stress. I think
Hmm.
that's the big too, is they pick up on what we're experiencing too, which is hard.
Yeah.
So,
I think what you
yeah.
said earlier about, like, not parenting, and when we're running our best, when we're running late, it's not so much the fact that we're running late, it's how we're feeling during those
Yep,
moments. And that feeling
absolutely.
translates to a lot of other difficult times during the day too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yay. Well, good conversations. I
Mm,
will maybe see some of you guys later this afternoon. If not, I hope you have a great day of trainings.
thank you. I think we are on lunch now, and then our time back together is at 12:30. So our third sessions begin then. Enjoy some lunch.